I thought I had friends, until one dinner bill exposed how they were using me like a walking ATM. This is the story of how a $218 restaurant receipt destroyed my friendships, ruined my work reputation, and forced me to rebuild my entire life. Emma had always believed that adulthood would eventually become easier, that once she got her first stable job, life would slowly start to look like the picture-perfect future she used to imagine in high school. But as she sat alone on her bed after another exhausting workday, surrounded by secondhand furniture and a stack of unopened bills, she realized that adulthood wasn't magical. It was survival. She was 24 years old, working as an administrative assistant at a digital marketing firm, and every month felt like a race she barely finished by the skin of her teeth. The rent was high, groceries were overpriced, gas was a luxury, and emergencies were devastating. Nothing was stable, nothing was predictable, and nothing felt secure. She didn't hate her life, but she often felt like she was being stretched thinner and thinner, balancing on a fragile edge no one seemed to see or care about. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. She was always the first one in the office and usually the last to leave. She set up meeting rooms, filed invoices, organized schedules, and handled dozens of tiny tasks that everyone took for granted until she missed one. She didn't get bonuses, she didn't get recognition, and she didn't get the luxury of having a bad day. Yet, she kept going, pushing through exhaustion because stopping wasn't an option. The office itself was visually impressive. Modern glass walls, trendy decor, expensive coffee machines, but the glamour faded quickly when you were paid just enough to stay afloat while others lived comfortably. Even though she didn't fit the glamorous aesthetic of the office, she tried her best to blend in. Her coworkers wore designer heels and carried handbags worth more than her monthly rent. They talked about brunch places, spa appointments, and international vacations like they were casual weekend plans. Emma didn't have the money or the lifestyle to participate in those conversations, but she stayed polite, laughed when they laughed, and nodded even when she had no idea what they were talking about. She felt like a spectator in someone else's world. Eventually, she got pulled into the orbit of three women who seemed to rule the social scene at work: Sarah, Jessica, and Amanda. They were confident, fashionable, and always surrounded by laughter. They had a magnetic presence, the kind people naturally gravitated toward. At first, it felt flattering that they wanted to include her. They invited her to lunch, added her to group chats, and encouraged her to go out with them every Friday after work. It felt like acceptance, like maybe she finally belonged somewhere. But slowly, over time, Emma started noticing patterns she didn't understand at first. Every restaurant they chose was high-end, every meal extravagant, every outing designed to be Instagram perfect. And even though she rarely ordered anything beyond a drink, they insisted on splitting the bill evenly. She tried mentioning her budget limitations once, but they brushed it off with a laugh. "Don't be dramatic, Emma, it's just dinner," Sarah had said, completely unaware or uncaring of how much that just dinner cost Emma in real terms. She kept paying because saying no felt harder than pulling out her debit card and silently suffering. She didn't want to look cheap, she didn't want pity, and she didn't want to be excluded. She convinced herself it was normal, that this was how adult friendships worked, that she was the problem for not being able to afford it. But with each outing, her stress grew. After every dinner, she mentally calculated how many meals she had left for the week, how many buses she could afford, and whether she'd have enough money for rent. Meanwhile, the other three drank, laughed, and lived without a care in the world. The breaking point came on a Friday evening that was already heavy for Emma. Her landlord had increased the rent by an amount she could barely handle. She had an unexpected medical bill sitting on her kitchen counter, and her bank balance was dangerously low. She didn't want to go out, not that night. She wanted to go home, eat something simple, and sleep. But at 5:01 p.m., just as she shut down her computer, Sarah turned to her with that bright, confident smile and announced, "Olive and Anchor tonight. You're coming, right?" Olive and Anchor was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, a place Emma would never step into if she had a choice. The thought of sitting there, pretending she belonged, pretending she could afford even a fraction of their lifestyle, filled her with dread. But saying no meant drama. Saying no meant questions. Saying no meant explanations she didn't want to give. So she forced a smile and said she would join them. When she arrived at the restaurant, they were already outside taking pictures, adjusting their hair and makeup, laughing loudly. Emma stood slightly off to the side, trying to appear relaxed and confident, even though she felt like she was wearing a neon sign flashing, "I don't belong here." They hugged her enthusiastically, complimented her outfit, and walked in together like they owned the place. The hostess greeted them warmly and led them to a table with a stunning city view. While they debated cocktails and appetizers, Emma sat quietly, staring at the menu with its intimidating prices. She already knew she wouldn't order food. She couldn't. So when the waiter arrived, she kept her voice steady and said, "Just sparkling water, please." Her friends burst into giggles, teasing her for being too healthy and urging her to try something, but she kept smiling, pretending she had already eaten earlier, pretending she was dying inside from embarrassment. The meal felt endless. They talked about luxury spa packages, designer shoes, and trips abroad. Emma nodded occasionally, feeling invisible and disconnected. When the plates arrived, the smell of the food made her stomach hurt with hunger, but she didn't reach for anything. She tried to just make it through the night and go home. But then, the bill came. The total was $218, and without hesitation, Sarah announced, "Okay girls, $54.50 each." And something inside Emma, something silent and tired and fed up, finally broke. Emma didn't explode or shout or make a scene. The moment her eyes landed on the total, everything inside her went quiet. Not calm, but silent in the way storms go silent right before they hit. She stared at the bill for a long second, feeling her heartbeat slowing instead of speeding up. She wasn't confused. She wasn't surprised. She was simply done. Done with pretending. Done with swallowing discomfort. Done with playing along in a game she never agreed to. Without raising her voice, she said, "I'm only paying for what I ordered." And her tone was so steady, so unshakably firm, that even she surprised herself. She pulled a few wrinkled bills from her purse, placed them neatly beside the check, and sat back in her chair with a calmness she hadn't felt in months. The reaction from the other end of the table was instant. Sarah's smile evaporated as if someone slapped it off her face. Her eyebrows shot up and she leaned forward like she couldn't believe what she just heard. Jessica stared at Emma with a tight, disbelieving smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile people use when they're seconds away from losing their temper but don't want to show it in public. Amanda blinked several times, her lips parted, the shock so visible it was almost comical. None of them knew how to respond because Emma had never challenged them before. She was supposed to be the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who never pushed back. At first, they tried to laugh it off, pretending she was joking. "Oh my God, Emma, you're hilarious," Sarah said, forcing a brittle laugh that cracked at the edges. "Come on, stop messing around." But Emma didn't smile. She didn't look uncomfortable. She simply stared back at them with a level gaze, making it clear she wasn't bluffing. And that was when things shifted. The laughter drained out of the conversation. The friendly expressions hardened. Jessica leaned forward, crossing her arms over her expensive blouse and narrowing her eyes. "We always split the bill evenly. That's how this works," she said, her voice shrinking in warmth and growing in sharpness. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a demand. Emma didn't flinch. She calmly repeated that she wasn't paying for their food. There was no apology in her tone, no guilt. For once, she didn't try to make anyone comfortable, and that was what shook them the most. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to being told no, and they certainly weren't used to someone disrupting their perfect little routine. The sudden shift of power dynamics made them uncomfortable in a way they couldn't hide. Without their usual control, their irritation began to bubble up into visible anger. Jessica pressed her hands flat on the table, like she was trying to physically hold her temper in place. "This is embarrassing," she whispered through clenched teeth, glancing around as if the other diners were watching their every move. Amanda sighed loudly, rolling her eyes dramatically, making sure everyone saw how inconvenienced she felt by Emma's boundary, while Sarah didn't even bother pretending. Her voice sharpened into accusation immediately. "Are you seriously going to be that person? You always do this. You enjoy the night with us, but you never want to pay your share." Emma blinked slowly, stunned by the audacity. Enjoy the night? She hadn't eaten. She hadn't drank anything except water. She had sat there quietly while they made fun of her and flaunted a lifestyle she barely scraped by observing. She was being accused of taking advantage when the reality was the exact opposite. The hypocrisy of it almost made her laugh. But instead of reacting emotionally, she kept her voice steady and said, "I didn't eat. I'm not paying for food I didn't order." The tension at the table grew thick enough to taste. Her calmness made them even more furious because they couldn't manipulate her with guilt or pressure the way they had in the past. They threw every argument at her, the friendship rule, the shared experience, the social etiquette, all of it twisted to justify their expectation that she should subsidize them. But Emma refused to be pulled back into a dynamic that drained her emotionally and financially. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and grabbed her coat. The sound of her chair scraping against the polished floor was loud enough to draw a few glances from nearby tables, but she didn't care. For the first time in months, she put herself first. As she walked toward the exit, she didn't look back, she didn't apologize, she didn't hesitate. She simply left. Outside, the cold night air wrapped around her like a shock, but instead of tightening her chest, it cleared her mind. She inhaled deeply, letting the sharpness of the wind calm her. Her breath formed tiny clouds in front of her as she walked to the bus stop, each step feeling lighter than the last. For the first time in a long while, she felt in control. The tension she carried for months began to unravel with every step she took away from that restaurant. But silence can be deceptive. Relief can be temporary, because while Emma was walking away feeling proud of finally drawing a boundary, the three women left behind at the table weren't just angry, they were plotting. Their egos had been bruised, their control had been challenged, and they weren't the type of people who let things go quietly. Even before they paid the bill, minus Emma's portion, they started crafting the narrative they planned to spread at work. In their version of the story, Emma wasn't the victim, she was the villain. She was the one who embarrassed them. She was the one who made a scene. She was the ungrateful, cheap coworker who ruined the night. And by the time they finished rewriting the events to suit their ego, they were already prepared to weaponize their social influence at the office. On Monday morning, the atmosphere in the office was different the moment Emma walked in. At first, she didn't understand why. People she normally chatted with briefly in the kitchen didn't smile back. Coworkers who usually greeted her warmly avoided eye contact. A few whispered behind their hands, glancing at her with expressions that weren't friendly, confused, or neutral. They were judging. The confusion hit Emma like a slow building wave. She couldn't figure out what changed so suddenly over the weekend. She hadn't done anything unusual. She had kept to herself. She had simply set a boundary. It wasn't long before she realized something was wrong. When she walked past the small office lounge, she caught Jessica whispering something to two other coworkers. The moment they saw Emma, they stopped talking, exchanged looks, and walked away. Amanda, usually bubbly and talkative, ignored her entirely, acting like she didn't exist. And worst of all, Sarah, the unofficial queen bee of the office social circle, gave Emma a single cold, dismissive glance, as if she were looking at something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. It was clear. The girls had already spread their version of the story, and the office was buying it. Emma tried to shake off the tension and carry on with her morning, but the shift in the atmosphere followed her like a shadow. When she went to the copy machine, there were two people there who immediately stopped talking mid-sentence. When she went to refill her water bottle, a group in the kitchen went silent until she left. Every interaction felt strained, like people had been warned about her. She didn't know exactly what the girls told the office, but she could feel the weight of it. It didn't take long before Carla from HR pulled Emma aside. Carla was not unkind, but her expression was one of forced neutrality, the kind people used when they were trying to hide their involvement in something messy. She gestured toward a small private office and closed the door behind them. Emma felt her stomach twist. She had no idea why HR wanted to speak to her. She had done nothing wrong. Carla sat down and folded her hands on the desk. She looked at Emma with a concerned but cautious expression. "Emma," she began, "there have been some comments circulating about you." The words were vague but heavy. Emma felt her chest tighten. She asked what kind of comments. Carla cleared her throat and said that several employees had come to her claiming Emma refused to pay her share during a group outing and created a scene that made her coworkers uncomfortable. According to the story circulating around the office, Emma had embarrassed everyone at the restaurant, created unnecessary drama, and walked out irresponsibly. Emma was stunned. She could hardly find words at first. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked slightly, not from guilt, but from disbelief. She explained everything: how she hadn't ordered food, how she couldn't afford the meal, how they laughed at her, how she simply paid for her drink and left. She told Carla the truth in detail, without exaggeration, without emotion clouding her words. As she spoke, she watched Carla's expression shift from neutral professionalism to surprise, then discomfort, then something that looked like reluctant understanding. Carla listened carefully and then sighed, leaning back in her chair. "That's not the version I heard," she admitted. "They made it sound like you were irresponsible and dramatic." Emma felt a wave of frustration wash over her. It was one thing to deal with unfair friends. It was another to have her professional reputation threatened by people twisting the truth. She asked Carla if she was in trouble, and Carla shook her head. "No," she said, "but you should be aware that people are talking, and you might want to clear the air before this becomes something bigger." Emma left the HR office feeling heavy and drained, but also strangely determined. She realized that her act of self-protection had been interpreted as betrayal by people who only cared about what she provided them. She hadn't broken any rules. She hadn't done anything wrong, but the ripple effect of standing up for herself was beginning to spread through her workplace like wildfire. She didn't know how bad things would get yet, but she knew this was only the beginning. The one night she finally stood up for herself had set off a chain reaction she couldn't stop now, and she had no idea just how far the consequences would reach. The drill sergeant stood there silently for a moment, staring at Ryan like he was some kind of glitch in the system, something unexpected that didn't fit the usual chaos of basic training. The rest of the platoon watched with wide eyes, ready to witness an explosion. But instead, the sergeant's voice dropped to a deadly calm, the type of tone that wasn't loud because it didn't need to be. He simply said, "Congratulations, son. You just volunteered for the worst week of your life." That line hit Ryan harder than any punch could have. He didn't understand it yet, but every recruit who'd been in the military longer than 5 minutes knew exactly what that tone meant. It meant the storm hadn't started. This was just the warning wind. Ryan expected to be screamed at again, or maybe thrown into push-ups until his arms gave out, but no, the drill sergeant did something worse. He smiled, and a smiling drill sergeant is like seeing a shark circling under the water, silent, calculated, and ready to tear you apart. The sergeant walked away calmly, whistling as if nothing had happened, leaving Ryan standing there confused while the entire platoon tried not to laugh or panic. They knew better. They knew what was coming. They knew that the drill sergeant wasn't going to punish Ryan with noise or physical drills. He was going to destroy him with something far more effective: time, tasks, and psychological pressure. That night, the real punishment began. Ryan had barely lain down on his bunk when the light snapped on and the drill sergeant burst through the door. "Ryan," he bellowed, "rise and shine, princess." Everyone groaned, but Ryan had no choice. He jumped out of bed, already exhausted from the day, and followed the sergeant outside into the freezing darkness. There was no yelling, no dramatic speech, just orders. Endless orders that made no sense. Move these sandbags from this side to that side, then move them back, then organize them by size, then by weight, then scatter them again. It was chaos disguised as work, designed to break his spirit. Hours passed like this, and Ryan's hands were raw and shaking. He kept dropping the sandbags, sweat freezing on his back. But every time he slowed down, the sergeant would appear out of nowhere with that sinister, calm voice. "What's the matter, rich boy? Daddy can't buy you a new spine?" Ryan gritted his teeth and kept going. He wanted to scream, but he knew it would only make things worse. This wasn't punishment, it was dismantling. By the time the sun rose, Ryan hadn't slept a single second, and he had no chance to rest because morning training began immediately. He stumbled into formation like a zombie, eyes half closed, arms numb. The other recruits looked at him with a mix of pity and amusement. They'd been punished before, but this was different. Ryan wasn't just being corrected, he was being reprogrammed. During the morning run, Ryan collapsed twice. The first time, the drill sergeant simply stepped over him as if he were a piece of trash on the ground. The second time, he stopped the entire platoon. "Look at this," the sergeant shouted. "This is what happens when you think you're above the rules." He made 2 of the strongest recruits pick Ryan up and carry him like a sack of potatoes while everyone else continued running. The humiliation was worse than the exhaustion. After the run, instead of letting him drink water or catch his breath, the sergeant assigned Ryan to fire watch, which meant standing completely still, guarding a door that didn't need guarding. He had to stay frozen while everyone else stretched, hydrated, and ate breakfast. He could smell the food, but couldn't have it. His stomach growled so loudly that even the recruits standing near him could hear it. Later in the day, the drill sergeant took things to another level. He walked up to Ryan holding a clipboard filled with complicated instructions. "Since you're so special, you're going to be my personal assistant this week," he said with a fake sweet tone. "You will follow me everywhere I go, write down every detail I say, and if you miss one thing, we start over." Ryan's brain felt like melted wax at this point. He could barely walk straight, and now he had to listen, write, and keep up with one of the fastest moving humans on Earth. For the next hours, Ryan chased the sergeant all over the base. He tripped over rocks, bumped into doors, dropped the clipboard multiple times, and earned one extra punishment for each mistake. At one point, he wrote the wrong time down on the schedule, and the sergeant didn't even yell. He just handed Ryan a giant metal bucket and told him to collect every loose bolt on the training field. There were hundreds, maybe thousands. Ryan crawled on his hands and knees, searching for them while the others practiced drills. The humiliation kept stacking. The drill sergeant made Ryan eat lunch standing in the corner facing the wall like a misbehaving child. Whenever someone walked by, the sergeant would announce loudly, "Don't disturb the artwork, boys. He's thinking deeply about the meaning of discipline." The platoon tried not to laugh, but some couldn't help it. Even they had to admit it was a brutal yet creative punishment. During weapons training that afternoon, the sergeant didn't trust Ryan with a rifle. He gave him a broom. "This is the only thing you're allowed to hold until you prove you can control your hands," he said. So while the others practiced firing positions, Ryan stood there sweeping dust from the concrete, looking like a janitor instead of a recruit. Every speck of dirt he missed became another set of push-ups. When evening came, Ryan expected to finally rest. But no, the drill sergeant had planned something special. He gathered everyone in the barracks and said, "Ryan here is going to demonstrate the correct way to fold a uniform." Ryan had no idea how, and every mistake he made meant the entire platoon had to redo their own uniforms. The anger turned toward him instantly. It was the first time the other recruits openly blamed him for their suffering. As night fell, Ryan's sleeplessness caught up to him. His words slurred, his legs shook, and he struggled to follow any order correctly. The drill sergeant finally stopped him and leaned in close. "You think you're tough because you punched me, son. You don't even know what toughness is." Then he ordered Ryan to stand outside in the cold with a heavy backpack filled with bricks. Hours passed, and not once did the sergeant check on him. It was deliberate. The point wasn't to watch. It was to let Ryan confront his own breaking point alone. Around midnight, Ryan's knees buckled. The pack slammed into the dirt and he collapsed face first. He lay there shivering, unable to move. He didn't know whether he was awake or dreaming. The cold stung his skin and his muscles refused to respond. He wondered if he had actually pushed himself into real danger. For the first time, fear crept in. Not fear of punishment, but fear of failure. The drill sergeant finally returned, stepping out of the shadows like he'd been watching the whole time. He crouched beside Ryan and said quietly, "You're not done until you say the words." Ryan didn't understand. The sergeant clarified, "Say you're not above the rest. Say you're not special. Say you're here to learn, not command." Ryan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. The sergeant gave him water, just enough for his throat to work. It took a long moment, but Ryan finally whispered, "I'm not better than anyone." The sergeant nodded. Louder. Ryan repeated it. The sergeant made him say it again and again until it wasn't just words, it was acceptance. It was the breaking of arrogance. It was the moment Ryan finally understood the reality of the military. When the sergeant finally lifted the backpack off him, Ryan cried, not of pain, but because he realized how wrong he had been. He had come in thinking the military was a choice, a backup plan, a place where he could bend the rules like he did in life. But here, nothing bent. Everything pushed back harder. The drill sergeant didn't yell anymore. He just said, "Get up, walk with me." They walked slowly back to the barracks in silence. For the first time, Ryan didn't feel angry or rebellious. He felt humbled. He felt human. The arrogance that once wrapped around him like armor had cracked. When he entered the barracks, the other recruits looked at him differently, not with mockery this time, but with something closer to respect. Not because he was strong, but because he had endured. They didn't clap, they didn't talk, they just nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that he had survived something brutal. Ryan collapsed on his bunk and closed his eyes, expecting the drill sergeant to shout again, but instead he heard a calm voice, "Sleep, you earned it." Those words shocked him more than any punishment, and somewhere between exhaustion and realization, Ryan finally understood that this wasn't a place to fight the system. It was a place to become something better. By dawn the next day, everyone could see the change. Ryan didn't walk with swagger. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't act like a spoiled kid. He fell into formation early, stood straight, and followed every order without question. The drill sergeant noticed immediately, but said nothing. He simply smirked, knowing the transformation had begun. Ryan still had a long way to go, but the worst part, the breaking, was over. Now came the rebuilding. And that rebuilding would be even more intense. The morning air was sharp and cold as Ryan stepped out of the barracks. The world seemed quieter now, almost respectful of the silence that had settled inside him. His body ached in ways he didn't know were possible, muscles sore from the previous day's relentless torment. But there was a strange clarity in the exhaustion, a clarity that whispered one truth. He had survived, and that survival mattered more than pride. Formation was already assembled. The platoon looked at Ryan, their eyes a mixture of curiosity and silent approval. He no longer carried the invisible shield of arrogance. Instead, he carried a quiet determination that was both unfamiliar and magnetic. The drill sergeant walked past him, nodding once, a subtle acknowledgement that Ryan was ready to move to the next stage. The day's training began with obstacle courses, each one designed to test not only physical endurance, but mental fortitude. Ryan approached each wall, mud pit, and rope climb with careful precision. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, conscious. He remembered the harsh lessons of the previous night. Mistakes were punished, arrogance destroyed, weakness exposed. This time, he would not falter. As he ran through the mud pit, sliding, splashing, the cold water stinging every exposed inch of skin, Ryan felt a strange exhilaration. Pain no longer frightened him. It informed him. Each thought of his boots against the soft earth, each gasp for air, reminded him that he was alive, that he was molded in the crucible of relentless discipline. At the rope climb, Ryan struggled at first, his arms trembling violently, but he gritted his teeth, recalling the hours of crawling on hands and knees, the humiliation, the exhaustion. Slowly, methodically, he ascended, hand over hand, until he reached the top. For a moment, he paused and looked down at the distance below, a vast expanse of training ground stretching like a battlefield. The drop didn't intimidate him. It humbled him. The drill sergeant observed quietly from below, a satisfied smirk on his face. He had been pushing Ryan not to destroy him, but to teach him patience, endurance, and the unglamorous beauty of perseverance. Ryan had learned that night. Strength was not about privilege or physical power. It was about enduring what others could not, about finding grit when every fiber of your body screamed to quit. Next came the firearms training. Ryan had held a broom before, and now he held a rifle. The weapon felt alien in his hands at first, its cold metal a reminder of the responsibility it carried. Every movement had to be precise, every breath controlled, every heartbeat steady. The sergeant whispered instructions only when necessary, forcing Ryan to internalize the lessons through focus and repetition. Ryan's shots were shaky initially, bullets veering off target, a testament to his earlier inexperience and fatigue. But with each shot, his rhythm improved. He learned to anticipate the rifle's kick, to control his breathing, to center his mind on the target. It wasn't just shooting, it was discipline manifest in action. And with every successful hit, he felt a flicker of confidence he had never known before. Lunch arrived in silence, but the atmosphere was different from the previous day. Ryan ate deliberately, chewing slowly, savoring the few moments of normalcy. The platoon glanced at him occasionally, respect mingling with curiosity. He had changed overnight, not in arrogance or flash, but in resilience. That was visible, undeniable, magnetic even. Afternoon drills focused on teamwork. The platoon navigated through simulated combat scenarios, crawling, coordinating, and strategizing under the watchful eye of the drill sergeant. Ryan, once a liability, became an asset. He communicated clearly, anticipated movements, and adjusted his pace to support others. For the first time, he felt what it meant to be part of something larger than himself. During a high-intensity march, Ryan began to notice his body responding differently. The muscles that had screamed in agony before now moved with a synchronized rhythm. Breathing became methodical, controlled. Pain was still present, but it no longer dictated his actions. He understood now that suffering was a teacher, not an enemy. Evenings were the hardest. After hours of physical exertion, the sergeant implemented mental endurance tests. Ryan had to memorize complex instructions, repeat them, and execute tasks while his body screamed for rest. Initially, he struggled, mixing up steps and earning the sharp glare of the sergeant. But slowly, through repetition and sheer force of will, he began to excel. Each completed task reinforced his growing confidence. One particularly grueling exercise required Ryan to carry a heavy pack through a twisting obstacle course in near darkness. The weight pressed down on him, the cold air burned his lungs, and the ground threatened to trip him at every step. Yet, he kept moving, focusing on one foot in front of the other, ignoring the screaming joints and aching muscles. By the time he reached the end, he felt invincible, not because the course was conquered, but because he had conquered himself. Night training was the ultimate test. Ryan and the platoon navigated through simulated war zones, relying on night vision, hand signals, and silent coordination. Each mistake had consequences, delays, extra exercises, or physical punishments. Ryan's mind, honed by exhaustion and previous humiliation, adapted quickly. He anticipated dangers, corrected errors silently, and led where necessary. The drill sergeant watched Ryan with a mixture of pride and calculation. The breaking was ended. The building phase was underway. Every command, every test, every correction was now reinforcing habits that would last long after the barracks lights went out. Ryan was no longer a spoiled rich kid. He was becoming a soldier, a participant in a system that demanded total commitment. During a brief pause, Ryan found himself alone with the sergeant. The older man's gaze pierced him, reading every micro-expression, every hesitation. "You're not done yet," he said quietly, "but you're ready to start believing in yourself, not because anyone told you to, but because you've seen what you're capable of." Ryan nodded, silent, absorbing the weight of that lesson. Sleep remained elusive. Even in bed, Ryan replayed the day's drills, each movement, each correction, analyzing mistakes and planning improvement. Exhaustion was deep, bone deep, yet he found a strange serenity in the relentless pace. For the first time, he didn't crave escape, he craved growth. The next morning began with long-distance running. Miles of track, dirt paths, and rugged terrain stretched ahead. Ryan's legs ached violently from the previous day's exertions, but he ran, not for escape, not for rebellion, but because he now understood the meaning of endurance. Progress was earned step by step, not demanded by force or privilege. Midway through the run, a younger recruit collapsed. Ryan instinctively slowed, helped him to his feet, and guided him to the water station. The drill sergeant observed from a distance, approving silently. Leadership was no longer about shouting, it was about action, empathy, and awareness. Ryan was starting to embody that. Obstacle courses returned in the afternoon, but now Ryan led small groups, coaching, demonstrating techniques, and correcting errors. His voice carried authority, but without arrogance. Every word reflected experience, endurance, and the lessons learned from humiliation and hardship. Weapons training intensified. Ryan learned advanced maneuvers, precision aiming, and tactical movement. The rifle was no longer an alien object. It was an extension of himself, controlled, precise, and deadly when necessary. Confidence radiated through each action. The transformation from naive rich kid to competent recruit, now undeniable. Team simulations demanded strategy. Ryan began to anticipate movements, recognize patterns, and support weaker recruits. His previous arrogance was replaced by accountability and responsibility. Every step, every instruction, every action was now thoughtful, deliberate, and aimed at collective success. Evening reflection sessions tested mental endurance. Recruits had to write journals detailing lessons learned, analyze mistakes, and present insights. Ryan's writings were introspective, honest, and strategic. He admitted past arrogance, acknowledged failures, and outlined plans for continued improvement. The sergeant read them, nodded, and offered pointed feedback. Night training pushed them to exhaustion. Ryan maneuvered through dark terrain, navigated obstacles, and executed complex orders with precision. Mistakes were minimal. Confidence was high. The transformation was visible to everyone. The broken rich kid was no more. He had emerged forged, disciplined, and focused. As the moon rose, Ryan reflected quietly by the training field. Pain had become a companion, exhaustion a teacher, and discipline a way of life. The journey was far from over, but he had crossed the threshold of ignorance and arrogance into awareness, resilience, and a burgeoning leadership that commanded respect naturally. By the time he returned to the barracks, Ryan was physically drained, but mentally sharpened. Sleep came easier now, but dreams were filled with reflection. Each challenge, each failure, each small victory was etched into his consciousness, creating a blueprint for who he would become over the coming weeks. The drill sergeant made his final inspection of the day. Ryan stood at attention, fatigued but unshakable. No words of praise were necessary. The silent acknowledgement, the smirk, and the firm nod were enough. Ryan understood that the real reward wasn't recognition, it was transformation. And transformation, he realized, was only the beginning. The dawn broke over the barracks with a muted glow, casting long shadows across the training ground. Ryan stood at the edge, watching the first light touch the cold earth. The silence around him felt different now, not empty, but full of meaning. He had endured nights of pain, days of relentless training, and moments that had tested the very limits of his mind and body. And yet, here he was, stronger, wiser, and unrecognizably transformed. Formation called him again, but this time he didn't feel the tension that had gripped him before. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, gaze steady. He walked with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't boast but demand. The dawn broke over the barracks with a muted glow, casting long shadows across the training ground. Ryan stood at the edge, watching the first light touch the cold earth. The silence around him felt different now, not empty, but full of meaning. He had endured nights of pain, days of relentless training, and moments that had tested the very limits of his mind and body. And yet, here he was, stronger, wiser, and unrecognizably transformed. Formation called him again, but this time he didn't feel the tension that had gripped him before. His posture was straight, shoulders squared, gaze steady. He walked with a kind of quiet confidence that didn't boast but demanded respect. The platoon noticed, the drill sergeant noticed, and even the newer recruits couldn't help but glance in awe. The day's exercises were grueling, as always, but Ryan approached them differently. Each task was a puzzle, each obstacle a test of both mind and body. He moved with precision and patience, aware of every muscle, every breath, every movement. It was no longer about proving himself, it was about mastering himself. During a long march through rugged terrain, Ryan's thoughts drifted to home. He remembered his father's money, his own arrogance, the way life had seemed easy and unfair. But now he understood the value of struggle, the transformative power of challenge, and the meaning of true accomplishment. Money could not teach these lessons. Only pain, persistence, and relentless effort could. A sudden drill change forced the platoon to navigate a dense, shadowed forest. Every step was precarious. Fallen logs, slippery mud, and hidden obstacles tested their balance and coordination. Ryan led confidently, guiding recruits, signaling warnings, and making quick decisions under pressure. His authority was natural, earned, and unshakable. The team reached a river crossing. Cold water surged over rocks, threatening to sweep the weak or careless downstream. Ryan hesitated only briefly, analyzing the safest path, then led the way. Others followed, trusting him completely. The fear he had once felt in similar situations had vanished, replaced by calculated courage. After the crossing, they set up a temporary camp. Each recruit took turns performing tasks, from fire-making to ration distribution. Ryan noticed the small details, corrected mistakes discreetly, and encouraged those who faltered. Leadership had become second nature, not forced or ostentatious, but rooted in competence and awareness. Night fell quickly, bringing with it bitter cold. The sergeant organized night drills, demanding precision, stealth, and coordination in near-total darkness. Ryan excelled, moving silently, anticipating obstacles, and guiding others with subtle hand signals. Every motion reflected experience, confidence, and the growth that had come through countless hours of hardship. During a pause, Ryan reflected on the man he had been just a week ago. The entitled, careless young man who thought wealth could substitute for effort now felt like a stranger. Every ounce of arrogance had been stripped away, replaced with respect for process, patience, and discipline. It was a rebirth forged in sweat and resolve. The following day began with a leadership simulation. Recruits were divided into squads, each assigned a mission. Ryan's squad was tasked with reconnaissance and tactical maneuvering under strict constraints. Ryan approached the task methodically, planning routes, anticipating challenges, and assigning roles based on individual strengths. Midway through the exercise, a simulated crisis occurred. One recruit injured himself, forcing the squad to adapt on the fly. Ryan coordinated the response, giving clear instructions while simultaneously performing tasks himself. The drill sergeant observed silently, noting Ryan's calm under pressure. This was the moment where training met real-world application. Hours of tactical maneuvers followed, each more challenging than the last. Ryan's body screamed, yet he moved fluidly, controlled and precise. Every command he issued reflected experience, every correction was measured, and every action demonstrated confidence earned through relentless effort. During a brief rest, Ryan observed his platoon. The once disparate group now operated like a cohesive unit. Their movements were synchronized, their communication effective, and their trust in one another implicit. Ryan's influence, subtle yet powerful, had helped forge this unity. Afternoon drills focused on endurance and stamina. Recruits ran long distances with weighted packs, navigated obstacle courses, and performed strenuous physical tasks. Ryan pushed himself and others, understanding that strength alone was meaningless without resilience and focus. As night approached, Ryan's platoon participated in a tactical night exercise simulating real combat conditions. Every step, every action required total awareness, precision, and coordination. Ryan excelled, guiding others while completing complex tasks himself, embodying the transformation from novice to leader. The drill sergeant approached Ryan quietly after the exercise. "You've changed," he said simply. No praise, no ceremony, just acknowledgement. Ryan nodded, absorbing the weight of those words. Transformation was rarely loud. It was often silent, internal, and undeniable to those who witnessed it. The following day began with marksmanship training under extreme conditions, moving targets, low light, and fatigue. Ryan handled his rifle with expertise, demonstrating mastery over both weapon and self. Every shot reflected control, focus, and unwavering calm, hallmarks of the transformation he had undergone. Later, tactical decision-making exercises tested mental acuity. Ryan analyzed scenarios, anticipated enemy movements, and adapted strategies in real time. His ability to think clearly under pressure now matched his physical resilience, completing the holistic growth the training demanded. During group debriefings, Ryan contributed insights, corrected misconceptions, and encouraged reflective thinking. His leadership was subtle yet influential, fostering a culture of learning, accountability, and shared responsibility. The weeks of training culminated in a final field exercise, combining endurance, tactical skill, leadership, and mental acuity. Ryan and his platoon navigated rugged terrain, overcame obstacles, managed simulated casualties, and executed complex maneuvers under intense scrutiny. Every challenge reinforced lessons learned: humility, patience, resilience, and the power of effort over privilege. Ryan's transformation was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, visible in his posture, decisions, and influence over others. When the exercise concluded, the drill sergeant gathered the platoon. He spoke briefly, acknowledging the effort, growth, and transformation witnessed over the past weeks. Ryan listened quietly, pride tempered by humility. He knew that true accomplishment was internal, not measured by applause or recognition. That night, Ryan sat alone, reflecting on the journey. He had entered the military as a spoiled, entitled young man, believing that wealth and influence could solve every problem. He now understood that real power came from discipline, endurance, empathy, and courage under pressure. The transformation was more than physical. It was mental, emotional, and moral. Ryan had learned responsibility, the value of teamwork, and the importance of self-respect, forged through effort rather than entitlement. As sleep finally claimed him, Ryan felt a sense of completeness. The trials, the suffering, the relentless challenges, they had all led to this moment. He was not just prepared for the next phase of training, he was prepared for life. In the quiet hours before dawn, Ryan realized that transformation was not a destination. It was a continuous journey. Each challenge, each hardship, each moment of doubt was an opportunity to grow, to refine, to strengthen. He had crossed the threshold from boy to man, from privilege to earned resilience. And as the first light touched the horizon, Ryan smiled faintly, knowing that he had finally discovered the truth that money could never buy: the power of endurance, the wisdom of humility, and the unshakable confidence born from truly knowing oneself.